Hello everyone. Welcome to the third Open Insight session with the topic Strengthening Collaboration, Monitor and Repository Integration. Today we have with us Cillian Joy from the National Open Access Repositories Project, Head of Open and Digital Research at the University of Galway Library, and Leonidas Pispiringas, Scholarly Communication Technical Expert at OpenAIRE. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen reasons, Chris Lugnan won't be joining us today. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. During the presentation, please keep your microphones muted and cameras off. But for the Q&A session, feel free to unmute and turn on your camera if you wish to participate. You're also welcome to submit your questions here in the chat. And please note that this session will be recorded and transcribed. If you wish to participate in the Q&A but prefer not to be included in the recording, please let us know here in the chat and we'll ensure your contribution is edited out. With that, I'll hand it over to Leonidas to start with his presentation. Leonidas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marie-Lee. Let me share my screen. So, welcome to the third session Open Insights of the Open Insights session series, which is focused on the repository on interoperability and on the repository data integration into the OpenAIRE graph, which is a very important step for every research performing organization in order to improve the data quality that is digested into the OpenAIRE graph and also is used for the aggregate metrics and indicators in the National Open Access Monitor of Ireland. So, first of all, generally, repositories interoperability is a strategic vision for OpenAIRE, not only for the project of the National Open Access Monitor, but in generally. And for repositories, increasingly need to follow excellent practices as defined by the interoperability guidelines, and they need to be certified through metadata validation processes and fair assessment tools. And also the continuous progress in open science mandates and standards states the technical development of repositories and the evolution of the repository networks. OpenAIRE is committed to improve consistently the interoperability guidelines to align with this evolution and to increase the capabilities of its infrastructure. And of course, we are committed to actively contribute to the development of international alignment and uptake of open standards. What are the interoperability guidelines? It is a common metadata framework for exchanging minimum metadata information. It's based on well-documented and standard existing metadata schemas and control vocabularies. With the constant development, they have been streamlined and modernized for maximum interoperability, and they were established in order to support the open access strategy of the European Commission to ensure a full alignment with the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud Interoperability Framework, was to meet the requirements of the OpenAIRE infrastructure and the ingestion into the OpenAIRE graph, and last but not least, to ensure that your data is fair and that they follow the FAIR principles. They have been used and adopted at a global landscape and are being used in repository communities and networks in Europe and beyond Europe. In Europe, we have national aggregators. For example, in Spain and Portugal, where they have a national data source as an aggregator that we collect metadata via the OIPMH protocol. There are research infrastructures or research portals for countries that are based on compatibility improvements, such as the Netherlands, And of course, already the Open Repositories Ireland initiative with Cillian will give you more details about. And of course, they are always at the IOSC core, the European Open Science Cloud Interoperability Framework. And internationally, we have regional networks that will aggregate metadata. For example, La Referencia from from Latin America. We have also national initiatives of open access repositories, aggregators, or scholarly communication networks, such as from Canada or from Japan. And of course, the compatibility with the OpenAIRE guideline has been implemented in repositories software platforms, in several repositories software platforms, from this space database, Pispiringas, and also to the Open Journal System platform, which is a platform of publishing open access journals. Quickly, a few words about the OpenAIRE Graph, which is the key asset, the basic service of OpenAIRE, and it is a key asset in open science infrastructure. It is based on open science principles, it's of high relevance to the community, and in a few words, it's a comprehensive data set of research outputs covering around 200 million and more research products from on publications, research data, research software, and other research products. We aggregate from several hundred thousands data sources, and we have links to more than 3 million grants, and also to 300, more than 300 K organizations. And all of these are linked together through citations and semantics. And I will present briefly the workflow we follow to ingest metadata into the OpenAIRE Graph from the data sources, which are from open access journals, repositories, GRIS platforms, research infrastructure catalogs, and other thematic repositories, which set the compliance with the OpenAIRE guidelines. And then they are aggregated into the OpenAIRE Graph via the OpenAIRE Provide dashboard, where they can register and validate the data source. Of course, we also harvest metadata from authoritative data sources, such as Crossref, DataCite, the OHA, and other large data sources, in order to provide a comprehensive information about the scholarly production globally. And after several workflows from the duplication, mining purposes, and other, we present the final product, which is the OpenAIRE Graph. And this is what is used for discovery, bibliometrics, monitoring, and assessing services that spread from OpenAIRE Explore to OpenAIRE Monitor, to OpenAIRE Connect gateways, and also to the National Open Access Monitor of Ireland. And of course, we have the OpenOps platform, where we deduplicate, disintegrate information about the organizations from the duplication and also stating parent-child relationships, and the Argos, the data management plan tool. And the OpenAIRE Broker, which is a service that enriches the metadata records of your registered repository. And all of these are connected through PIDs and federated authentication and authorization. So this was my introduction. I will hand over to Cillian.
Thank you. I'll get started now. Perfect. You should be able to see that. So thanks very much for the introduction and that good kind of overview of OpenAIRE in general. Like, I'm going to focus more on, obviously I'm going to focus more on what we've been doing in Ireland on the repository side. I'm going to touch on some of the tools in a much more kind of simplistic way, I think, you know, that was just shown there. But I think the big picture is, I think, a stronger realization, emergence of the relationship between the repositories, the open repositories in Ireland, and the Irish Open Access Monitor. As in, the monitor will show the results of the good work that we're doing to try and improve data quality. So it really goes hand in hand, and I think the interoperability and kind of the working between them is really important. So what I'm going to talk about is, I have to talk about the projects, I have to give some context, and then just talk about some of the workflows we've been working on, and really kind of end on the guidelines that we've created for the Irish community. There are clearly already guidelines there in terms of OpenAIRE, but we felt that we just needed to give a little bit more explanation. None of the guidelines have been changed. I think we're just giving more context, really. So, as I said, I'm going to start with a brief overview of the project. Many of you would have heard of this before, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there's a project that has been running for the last 2 years in Ireland to strengthen and align the open access repositories. It's funded by the National Open Research Forum, and this forum itself is a collection of different stakeholders, and it's really driving change in Ireland. There is a national plan for open research, and it has 3 themes, as you see in front of you there. And this work that we're doing on the repositories, and there's also a lot of other projects going on as well in that area, but it's all under theme 2. That's it, aiming for 100% open access. So, like, when we started this project, we knew it wasn't just a matter of just fix some technical things and off we go. Like, it's technology and community at the same time, and both of these things need to happen in tandem. So we need to make repository improvements. We need to have a roadmap in terms of where we're going, and everyone needs to be involved in that. That's from the directors running the institutions, people putting in the information, researchers, etc. So we did a lot of work, really, I think, on talking to the community, getting different inputs, surveys, and talking to lots of different people. And just probably less than a year ago now, we published a strategic roadmap for open repositories in Ireland, and that's available. But in essence, like, it did a lot of things. It's quite a good document, but it picked out some specific challenges. One, which we're going to talk about today mainly, is the metadata quality piece. Other thing around resourcing and things like that, which is generally always there, but also things related to kind of visibility and some cultural issues as well. Now, when there's challenges, there's always recommendations, and there's a couple that came out, but the important one again is standardizing metadata, and it clearly was OpenAIRE version 4, which is the latest stable at the time, and that is what we are aiming to bring all repositories in Ireland up to. And we started the work to do that, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And then, obviously, that needs to be kept going and sustained as well. And that's where governance comes in, and looking at how we do this and what sort of roadmap are we on. So these are conversations that we are attempting to have. And then, in addition, the role of repositories comes up as well. And you can't really disassociate these things, because you have to ask the question, why are we doing this? So I think it's important to keep those things in mind as well. But when we did look at the specific Irish data from the survey, and also from working with OpenAIRE and the monitor report and things like that, from the survey, we found, that the compliance with OpenAIRE, you would think it was relatively low, to be honest, less than half with any version of OpenAIRE. But the opportunity is that 4 out of every 10 open repositories were planning immediate changes. So there's an opportunity to make some improvements. There's a general alignment with good metadata practice in general. But I suppose the need for more standardization across the community, that's really what the case that we've been trying to drive home. And across our network of repositories, there are 4 key areas where we're not doing too well in terms of standardization. And that's the license condition, access rights, that they're critical pieces, and the project funder information and publication type as well. Now, if you looked at an individual repository, you might find that they may have different gaps in their metadata. And there's some of the challenges I think that we're finding is to really identify on an individual basis what some of the issues are when trying to fix them. The report also talked about community-driven solutions, and this culminated in, which has already been mentioned, the Open Repositories Ireland network of open repositories in Ireland. Now, this is an evolution of previous work that had been going on between repository managers, but this is a membership organization that was launched just before Christmas in December 2024 and aims to continue the work of the project. So starting in April, and the mechanics of the network are being put in place at the moment. So I'm kind of flying through this just to give a kind of an overview. So that's where we are in terms of the project. But I talked about the role of repositories as well, and just keep in mind, I think that equity of access, that's and achieving 100% open access, like these are key roles for repositories. Preserving institutional content, that can't be guaranteed from other routes of publishing. And then, of course, not just of, let's say, a deposit point to achieve open access. Open access repositories in terms of a community and in terms of a technology infrastructure provide an alternative to publishing, or can provide an alternative to publishing. So I won't go into too much detail, but I think the key term is overlay journal, where you use your existing infrastructure of open repositories to submit and store the data, and then on top of that, you build workflow. So in essence, it's combining green and diamond, if you're familiar with those terms. And why we feel that now we feel there's a good kind of momentum around the space. I mentioned North, but there's some interesting work going on there on the policy side nationally. There's other commitments being made internationally. There's a kind of a re-emphasis, I think, on. There's always been emphasis on cost, obviously, but there's been a re-emphasis specifically in Ireland, let's say, in terms of publishing and how we can get better value from the money that we're putting into the system. So, does it all have to go one way, or can some in terms of in a planned way be put into open repository infrastructure to transition to a different way of doing things? And I mentioned the national policy, and the reason I'll talk about this is that there is another North project called SCORE, which is working on a bill in Ireland, but also a policy framework for institutions. And it really is a strong commitment to 100% open access, to publishing in open repositories, and to publishing quickly in open repositories as well. And it specifically calls out, this is your policy now, institution calling out compliance monitoring. So you're talking the open access monitor becoming more important, and then metadata standardization, which is really what the project that I've been working on, or I, with a lot of different other people, have been working on, is focused on. So that's mainly the kind of background and drivers and things like that. I'm just going to jump straight now really into talking about data quality and what we've been doing to try and improve data quality. We already saw a nice picture workflow. I'm going to show you another workflow that isn't as nice, but it has kind of bare bones in terms of what we're interested in. The top is the inputs. That's the people inputting and submitting, and repository managers improving data quality, maybe manually, or maybe the data comes upstream from the CRIS systems or other places. But in the end, it finds itself, the data finds itself in the repository. And in terms of OpenAIRE compliance, that means then connecting the repository to OpenAIRE via the Provide interface, where there's validators and all these tools that can help us there, which in turn goes into the graph, which in turn creates the monitor. Now, it's not a full cycle like that, but it should be a full cycle, I think. I suppose that's the idea, in the sense that we can use the monitor for monitoring how we're doing in terms of data quality at a kind of a standard level. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but the monitor has repository dashboards as well for each repository in Ireland. So this is the University of Galway one, and I hope that all the repository managers are connected in with this, and that they you have options here to manage your repository and then put in different kind of users. It also provides a link to the Provide interface with OpenAIRE. So again, this is the monitor kind of showing some tooling there. Apologies. Yep, so I'm working in a library, so we get some of those sometimes. So that's the OpenAIRE monitor. And when you go to provide, you see this sort of an interface where when you connect it up and you look at your report, you see a report for each field. And if I pick on one field here, the embargo period date, this data is for Galway, recent data. You see that we're not like at full compliance. And when a repository manager looks at this, they can see, you know, okay, right, I'm not doing too well here. Well, I'm doing fairly well, but not well enough, because we are obviously aiming, and it should be higher data quality than that. You'd want to know what is the actual problem. And the Provide tool gives you some links so you can follow that lists some of the errors. Like that works well if the errors are consistent. It's the same issue consistently in the repository, but often that's not the case because repositories kind of go through phases of data quality improvement. So different changes have been made at different times. So it is actually quite challenging to identify the exact issues, you know, on an item by item basis in repositories. So I'll just highlight that work. Now I'm just going to jump back to the work we've been doing specifically on what changes are we making in repositories in terms of repository improvements to, at a kind of system level, improve data quality, and what we're doing to try and help the community then as well. So we started kind of, we decided we couldn't do obviously everything in Ireland, so we started with a pilot. That pilot included ATU, University of Galway, Marine Institute, and the HSC. All users of DSpace and all have some level of compliance with OpenAIRE. And that broke down into two main use cases, really. One use case was where content got into the repository mainly manually. So either individual items or maybe in bulk. And then the other use case was where the data normally came from something upstream and maybe a bit of manual as well. So the data is coming from a CRIS or something like that. So we went through a process basically of looking at all of the OpenAIRE version for fields and agreeing between ourselves how we can comply with the standards, and that in turn turned into some guidelines. But during that process, we found we could do a couple of things. There were a couple of things we found in the. So basically what happens is you put your data into your repository for DSpace, that data then is crosswalked inside of DSpace out to the OAI PMH interface to make it OpenAIRE compliant. So that's code that exists in DSpace basically. And we found a few improvements that could be made to that. 5 specifically, a lot around dates and how the data comes out. And this is for all of the DSpace community, not just here, us in Ireland, but all of the DSpace community. Now, these changes have been made already. They've gone through the community DSpace workflow and process for making changes. We demoed them recently, so we saw them change. I can't say for definite at this moment in time if they're publicly available. They probably are, but they're critical things that are basically across the system will improve compliance with OpenAIRE and obviously better data quality. Some of the other areas that didn't really fit into the kind of DSpace way of working were how do we get the ORCID ID into the people data, and how do we get the funder information in as well. And we took other pathways and routes that I won't particularly get into it now, but the overall outcome is guidance for additional guidance for Ireland that is based on the OpenAIRE version 4 guidelines. So it is specific to DSpace, but I think it is also a generic approach because the guidance is kind of it's a text-based approach, and I'll show you an example now in a minute of what I exactly mean. I think we can't get away from the fact that in general we need to have a better understanding of the metadata fields that are in the repository and what ones are being mapped out to OpenAIRE. We have to do that. But the big picture is that this document and these guidelines are now done, and they will move to the Open Repositories Ireland community to continually manage and socialize, I suppose, in that group. So I'm coming to the end near now. I'm just going to show an example of those guidelines for 2 fields. One is the contributor field. So these are in essence, well, we call them mandatory they're mandatory in OpenAIRE, but they're obviously mandatory for us as well. So for the contributor, it gives an example of the source field in DSpace, exactly what DC field it is. It gives an example, a localized example, and then shows what the crosswalk out of DSpace OpenAIRE, the OAI PMH interface will show to OpenAIRE. So in essence, if you take the contributor in terms of the person that's there, Alan Ryder, we make sure that the ORCID ID has to be in there. So how do we do that? We need to have access to that ORCID ID in some way in DSpace, and then we need to be able to get that data into the crosswalk. So generally in the guidelines, we have something that says requires guidance and that text. So it's not specifically saying, you have to do X, Y, and Z, but it's saying that you have to here you either use some mechanism in DSpace to get the ORCID ID in. Either that's from there are person entities you can put into DSpace, and some people will do that, and some other people then will choose to get the data into DSpace in another way. And we've actually built an authority control in DSpace where when you're adding an author let's say in the submission form, you can do an ORCID ID lookup. So definitely, you basically have authority control added to DSpace. So that's something that we've built as part of the project. And then another example, which is just very similar. It's just another one where we have an authority control lookup. That's the funder reference, and we are here using the OpenAIRE API to search for the funder or the grant, and then that puts the information into the appropriate format. So that's just an example. We've done this for every field, and it's quite a big document. And for us, sorry, it's not quite a big document, is what I'm saying. So there's basically about half a page for each field. The next steps are, as I said already, get those guidelines to be in a situation where they are managed by the community. And we've only done this for the pilot repositories. If I was talking now, I'd say that that's by the end of the project, and we will aim to have other repositories done as well. Not all, because we just can't stretch to do all. But the key question we're asking ourselves, I think, is, they're kind of system-wide improvements that we can make. So we need to think about decisions like, are we going to go back and look at legacy data? Or how can we better understand what the exact issues are in our repository? So we think it would be useful to have more kind of item level granularity, some sort of report where we could really see the issues at an item by item level across the board. And then, of course, things change. The guidelines will change and evolve and update. The community will change and update, and that's what the community is there to do. It's to be that consistent kind of bridge, I think, as things evolve. And the final thing is just to acknowledge all the different people involved in the project. Chris, who couldn't be here today, unfortunately, has been doing great work. Then there's the project board and the project working group from a whole suite of different institutions and groupings and organizations in Ireland. At that point, I am just going to say thank you very much. And there is a link to the repositories project webpage.
Thank you, Cillian, so much for your presentation. Please feel free, everyone, if you have any questions, to raise your hand or type in the chat. Okay, we can proceed with Leonidas.
Thank you, Cillian, for the great presentation and for the great work that you're doing in Ireland for the institutional repositories. I will continue saying a few things about the interoperability and the repository data integration. I will also present the repository monitor briefly in the National Open Oxygen Monitor platform, and also we'll go through the OpenAIRE Provide dashboard and some functionalities there. So, first of all, the compatibility benefits. What a data source and repository would get benefit by being compatible with the latest versions of the OpenAIRE guidelines. First of all, you have improved interoperability because you meet with the latest 19 repository standards. We will have more contextualized, flexible content because we can form links and relationships to other type of research outcomes and entities. And this is something that is one of my answers to the question that Cillian raised in his last slide on what can be done next on improving the data quality. Flexible, the content can be more flexible by using different and improved vocabularies according to the needs of the community, as OpenAIRE guidelines have incorporated the control vocabularies. And of course, you're embedded in the research infrastructure ecosystem as you're aligned with open science mandates, standards, and support for well-documented and well-established metadata schemas and namespace abbreviations. This is your road to fairness, because OpenAIRE guidelines, by definition, is the road to fairness. Most, if not all of the rules and the elements in the OpenAIRE guidelines improve the findability or accessibility or interoperability or reusability. And of course, it is your gateway to EOS. As the OpenAIRE Graph is the authoritative data source for the European Open Science Cloud. And since you are ingested into the OpenAIRE Graph, you are also going to be visible in the EOS infrastructures. So the latest versions that we are going to support in the near future, we have already launched a campaign on the compatibility upgrade with the OpenAIRE guidelines, are version 3 and version 4. Version 3 of the OpenAIRE guidelines is based on the double core metadata schema. The additions that were made from the previous versions where you can also add the open access and also fund it either from the European Commission or national or other funders content. There are new elements for indicating alternative identifiers. We introduced the linking of publications to other publications and to datasets, and also introduced the Horizon Europe funding program from the European Commission. And in version 4 of the OpenAIRE guidelines, it has the OAI OpenAIRE metadata prefix, which is a metadata schema that is based on this prefix, the doubling core, and the DataSite schema. We have elements from from all of those three metadata prefixes. Guideline version 4 support identifier schemes for authors, organizations, funders, and scholarly resources. We introduce the core control vocabularies, and you can represent open and closed content according to the OpenAIRE content acquisition policy. The core control vocabularies that we have incorporated into the OpenAIRE guideline version 4 are the core control vocabulary for the resource type and the one for the access rights. And one of our next work is also to incorporate the core control vocabulary to the OpenAIRE guidelines version 3 by introducing a new version. Regarding the fairness that I have talked about, the OpenAIRE guidelines, since from the beginning of their time, they have put the focus on elements that can be found today in the FAIR principles. And the community-based refinement and engagement and update of the OpenAIRE guidelines over time include elements with their descriptions that are consistent with the motivation of FAIR. we have been developing the fair validator that will be launched in sometime in the next months, where we have fair rules that are based on the fair maturity model from RDA, and also based on the fair is fair data objects assessment metrics. Of course, all these fair rules are mapped to the OpenAIRE guidelines. So OpenAIRE Provide dashboard. This is a one-stop shop web service for data sources from institutional thematic repositories to CRIS platform, data repositories, open access journals, and aggregators to interact with OpenAIRE, where they can register their data source, they can validate their compatibility with the OpenAIRE guidelines, so that they can share and exchange metadata and content. And it's a front-end access to many OpenAIRE's backend services. Well, through the OpenAIRE Provide dashboard, you can validate the metadata records of your repository. You can register for regular aggregation and integration into the OpenAIRE graph. You can see information regarding the aggregation history through the collection monitor, or you can track the aggregation states, collection mode, the number of records that were collected and transformed, and also you can see the current index version that is available in OpenAIRE Graph and also to every other OpenAIRE services. You have access to the OpenAIRE broker, where you can get enrichments regarding your metadata from things like other additional open access version of your research products to enrich metadata on PIDs, on ORCID IDs, and on several other things, which you can download, of course, and incorporate into your repository if you want to. You can enable the OpenAIRE usage count metrics in order to have to benefit from an aggregated environment and see charts about use and downloads of your repository, and also you can download reports at counter 5 format. And additionally, there are net indicators and metrics regarding the downloads into the monitoring of your RPO in the National Open Access Monitor environment, where you can see aggregated statistics about the downloads that come of your research product that comes from your repository, and also from any other repositories that we may find a duplicate version of your research product. And of course, all this stuff, all of these services provide some of these services provide also notifications about these functionalities and alerts. We have another detailed guides on how to register, to validate and register your data source in OpenAIRE Provide. We are here for at every step on the way, during the registration, the validation, the registration, and also at a later stage by our help desk and support to assist you in every step of the way. And the next steps that we designed for the structural update of the OpenAIRE guidelines, we're thinking of, we're going to have the 3 types of OpenAIRE guidelines: the OpenAIRE interoperability guidelines for repositories, for CRIS systems, and for open access journals. We want to upgrade to the latest version of the supported metadata schemes that we use into metadata standards that we use for the OpenAIRE guidelines. And of course, we want to upgrade the core control vocabularies integration. I've already told you about the version 3 of OpenAIRE guidelines. So let me also go through. Cillian has already presented you with the dashboard, the repository monitor, where we have a list of all the registered repositories in OpenAIRE. with their compatibility with the OpenAIRE guidelines. In case that you are a dashboard manager, a primary dashboard manager of your repository, and you are also an administrator in the registration in OpenAIRE Provide, you're going to have, when you sign in, the link to the OpenAIRE Provide dashboard with the record of your repository, where you can see the aggregation history of the records and the index, the currently indexed version, when the content was updated on the portal and the new version of the OpenAIRE graph had been publicly available. This part provides the enrichments, which I don't know why they will definitely be updated during the next update of the OpenAIRE graph this month for University of Galway. Since I don't see it, let's go to University of Minho to see a respective example of enrichments. We have two categories. We have the more category where there are additional metadata information that can enrich your content, such as another open access version or another position identifier associated to your publication. We have the number of events, and you can see in details for each publication the additional position identifier that had been added. And also for the missing category, we have, for example, ORCID IDs, subjects, or abstracts. And you can also see these details. And by subscribing to each category, to this event, you can receive the full list of these events. And you are notified about new enrichment events for your data source. And in the usage count, at the OpenAIRE Provide, you see few details about the views and downloads of your data source, your repository, and you can get statistic reports in Counter 5 format. In the monitor, in the repository monitor at the National Open Access Monitor of Ireland, you have two sections. The scholarly output section, where you can see the publications, the peer-reviewed publications, and the open access with license peer-reviewed publications that come from your repository. And this at this section, these versions of the metadata records are the duplicated versions from the OpenAIRE graph. We have publication trends by fields of science, by SDGs. You can see the top publishers by number of publications and publications by type. And at the access right tab, you get information explicitly from the repository instance of the publication, from the record that we aggregate from your repository and not the duplicated version, where you can see information that you can find. The most useful information currently that we can provide is the access rights information, where you can see if the open access version of your publications have a license or not. And we also provide a chart by broken down by fields of science level 1 and 2. So thank you very much. Regarding one last comment regarding the compatibility and the concept of the open access definition at the National Open Access Monitor of Ireland, where we want research hubs to have also a license in order to be stated open access. We have open access with license and with no license. The field, the license field in the OpenAIRE guidelines is kind of, it's very important, though we have it as a recommended in the OpenAIRE guidelines, it's very important for you to populate it in the repository.
Thank you so much, Leonidas. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or comments, or if you would like to add something. In the meanwhile, we received a question for Cillian. Two questions, actually. So the first one is the guide on improving metadata quality, like the example given about the DC contributor advisor field, available somewhere to download and work with in our own repositories?
So where we are with that is we're nearly there. So it's there. It's not fully publicly downloadable yet. So at this stage, there's probably no reason why it shouldn't be. But it's if you're in the Open Repositories Ireland community or network, like that's where it's definitely available through that network. We have a mailing list, and I suppose we're setting up the network and all the components around it. So if the question was asked on the email list, I think that could definitely be shared. There's nothing to stopping it's been shared at this stage. I think it's been approved. There's maybe one or two little points in it that need to be improved. I'll just say one thing on I know you mentioned the license condition, and which is number 18. Yeah, so in our guidelines and our advice, we changed that to be mandatory, even though OpenAIRE say it's recommended. So it's good to hear that there's some convergence there as well. So hope that helps.
Thank you, Cillian. The second question, there seems to be links on the 5 things we can do to improve our DSpace repository to become more compliant. Is this something we have access to as well?
Yes, definitely. By the end of the call, I'll pop it into chat. So there is a GitHub link that summarizes all the work that we're doing. That there's a lot going on, and it's hard to describe in a couple of minutes. But in essence, we're making changes for all the DSpace community, and trying for all the branches as well. I can't remember the exact detail. It's in the GitHub link. So I suppose what we're trying to do is any changes that we're making will be in the GitHub code base. You're going forward as well. So version 8, version 9, and things like that. This isn't just a once-off thing. But just to say some of the changes we're making. So for example, the authority control for when you're looking at people and connecting their ORCID that way, and the same for the using the OpenAIRE API to get funder information. Like that would be debatable in the DSpace community whether like that would be the way that they would want to do it. So for now, we have implemented that in our own environment, which is the Open Repositories product provided by Supplier@Mire, and it will be available in their version. And I suppose we're working then at what could the next stage be for that for the community as well. So I'll go find that link and I'll pop it into chat hopefully before we finish. If not, I'll find another way to circulate it.
If not, please send it to me and I will make sure to include it in the follow-up email along with the presentation slides and the recording so everyone can have access to it. Thank you, Cillian. We have another question probably for Leonidas.
We don't support this functionality. We don't have the infrastructure for an institution to create an institutional repository. You have to have your own platform in order to register into OpenAIRE so that we aggregate the metadata records from your repository.
Thank you, Leonidas. Also, please feel free to send any questions to our help desk. You can find it at openair.eu for further information regarding repositories. We still have a few minutes. Please feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. Great, thank you, Cillian.
Can I just interrupt for a minute?
Yes, of course, Aaron.
Thank you. And thanks to Leonidas and Cillian for a very informative webinar and for everybody for joining. Just to let you know, we're conducting a survey on these series of webinars just to get feedback from the community on how you think they're working and topics you might like covered. So I'm going to share a link in the chat now to the survey, and we'll also be circulating this by email over the next week.
Thank you, Aaron. Would you like me to include the link in the follow-up email?
That would be great. Thank you.
Of course. I would like also to share the date for our next session. It's the 13th of March. I will add here the registration link for everyone to have it. I will also include it in the follow-up email. Oh, sorry. Here is the registration link. And the topic of our next session is monitor challenges and usability. If you have any other thoughts, questions, comments you would like to add, please feel free. So we are on time and we can close this meeting. So thank you so much, Cillian, for being here today, for your presentation. Thank you, Leonidas, as well, for your insightful presentation. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you in our next session. Have a very nice day and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.